Welcome, everyone, to GlobalView. My name is Antonio Martinez, and I'm the head of Americas and Global Economics at FrontierView, a fiscal node company that is a part of its Global Intelligence business unit. We at FrontierView work as a trusted partner for 300 multinational companies, supporting VPs of region, CFOs, and strategy leads. Our focus is on empowering strategic planning and market monitoring to drive growth and profitability for these companies. We have dedicated research practices for North America, Latin America, Asia Pacific, Europe, Middle East, and Africa, as well as our global economics and healthcare research practices. We work with clients across a variety of verticals, including consumer, healthcare, technology, and industrials, and just a wide range of B2B industries as well. Today, we will be discussing what is increasingly top of mind for executives across different regions, part of the conversations we're having with them on a day-to-day basis, which is the outlook for the U.S. elections in November. I am joined by our senior analyst for North America and Global Economics, Antoine Bradley, who will be discussing his latest research piece on the U.S. election outlook. Antoine, thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me, Antonio.
So, just to get us started, what is the outlook for the U.S. election? Not just the White House, but also Congress, and tell us a little bit about what we're thinking about there.
Yeah, so we've actually worked through this in terms of scenarios. So here you can see what our base case is in terms of the U.S. election, as well as the other scenarios that we're looking at. But really, our base case is that we think the 2024 election will be a rematch of 2020 between Joe Biden and Donald Trump, which we expect Donald Trump to narrowly win. Now, there are a few reasons for that. Both candidates fundamentally are quite unpopular with the electorate, but it's more that Joe Biden is even more unpopular than Donald Trump. One reason for that is his age. Unfortunately, that is a big part of his electoral chances. People think he's too old to run a second term. He would be 86 at the end of his second term, and that's worrying people a lot. Another reason, which is pretty substantial, is that since he's come into office, the cost of living has increased by 20%. A lot of people attribute that to his economic management. And then finally, you do see some weakness in his progressive wing of his party, and that has to do with some of the stances that the U.S. government has on the war in Gaza. So we expect this confluence of weaknesses to slightly give Donald Trump the edge come November. When it comes to Congress, so in terms of the Senate is basically almost guaranteed to flip to Republicans. Democrats are defending about twice as many seats as Republicans are, and they're less safe seats. So it's not looking great for Democrats on that front, whereas the House of Representatives, it's more or less a coin flip. But given that people don't really split the ticket anymore when they vote, we think that if the momentum is on Donald Trump's side when it comes to the White House race, we think that Republicans will also take the House of Representatives. So that's the outlook really for the election itself.
Well, okay, so I think every time we mention this to the executives we work with, they give a little bit of a double take. So it's an interesting view. But the question we always get next is, what are the areas of similarity with, say, the previous Trump administration, particularly when they started back in 2016? And what are some new things that companies executives can expect, basically sometime this year, 1 year from now?
Yeah, so I mean, it's a question we get a lot. What does Trump 2 look like compared to Trump 1? I think in terms of areas of similarity, you can expect some of the big themes of Donald Trump's first presidency to feature again in a potential second presidency. Trade, obviously, is a big one. Donald Trump finds the U.S.'s trade deficit something that's fundamentally unfair and that he wants to get rid of to the greatest extent possible, and that would come through the use of tariffs, which we'll get to in a little bit. The attitude towards China is also going to be similar, if not even more, I would say, harsh. In a second term, you would see continuation of tariffs, if not even more tariffs on China. You would see moves to attempt to restrict Chinese investment into the US, moves to attempt to phase out essential imports of essential goods into the US from China. So you would really want to see, expect to see even harsher rhetoric there. And then you would, in terms of similarities with the first presidency, also see some tax cuts or attempts to do so. In terms of differences, the world has changed since Donald Trump left office. Ukraine obviously is a big topic, and Donald Trump is a critic of the amount of money that the US sends to Ukraine, and so you would expect reductions in funding for Ukraine, and potentially pressure to lead Zelensky and Putin to the negotiating table. One thing that I think is also interesting is that a second Trump presidency would be much more prepared than the first one. A lot of Trump's team were frustrated in 2016 because they were slightly unprepared when they came in, and now they really want to hit the ground running. So there's a lot of policy work being done in the background. There's a lot of day one executive orders that we would expect to see, and that's definitely a difference. And then finally, sort of related to that, but civil service reform is a big part of what we expect. The Trump administration would want to reclassify thousands of civil servants so that they could become political appointees, with ultimately the aim of surrounding the White House with people more aligned with Trump himself.
Well, it makes a lot of sense. One thing I can tell you is from at FrontierView, when we were thinking and talking about the Trump administration, predominantly a lot of that time was talking about tariff policy, trade policy. How realistic do you see Trump's policies on tariffs, especially what he had talked about, a blanket 10% hike proposal? How should executives, how do global companies should be thinking about this?
Yeah, so the 10% tariff idea, which Donald Trump floated a few months ago, is one that really rings alarm bells in a lot of people's heads. We think that actual proposal is more of a negotiation tactic, a bit more of a statement of intent than an actual policy proposal. However, you do see other ideas which we think are a bit more realistic. One is the so-called Reciprocal Trade Act, where in a situation where a country applies higher tariffs on US goods than the US applies on that country's goods, you would see either pressure for that country to reduce their tariffs, or the US increasing the tariffs on that country itself. And that's something that we would expect, especially countries in Asia, as you can see on this bubble chart, countries in Asia to be vulnerable to or at risk of. And then really, we would also expect to see some of the tools that they used in the first administration, so Section 232, Section 338, which would be a bit more targeted. But we do think fundamentally that the second Trump administration would double down, and crucially, he would be surrounded by people who don't disagree with him as much as some of his entourage in the first presidency. So you would see a bit more of a smooth implementation there. And as I said before, there's a lot of policy preparation happening now that would allow them to hit the ground running.
One thing we get always a bit of pushback is always around scenarios going into this year with two very, very elderly president, but also one, and former President Trump's case issues question marks around the status of his court cases as something that could potentially derail his candidacy. What's the update there?
Yeah, so it's definitely something to keep an eye on. It's a very unique situation, an unprecedented situation. Donald Trump is facing a litany of civil cases, but crucially for criminal cases, and even more crucially, two of those have to do with the events of the 2020 election. Now, the reason we talk about these and we keep an eye on these is that although if you're convicted of a crime, you aren't necessarily barred from running for president. If the crime is deemed to be insurrection or rebellion, then that could potentially bar you. And so a couple of states have brought this charge against Donald Trump, saying, this guy in 2020 engaged in insurrection, and therefore he shouldn't be able to run again. This is going to the Supreme Court, and we expect the Supreme Court to throw this out. Actually, news came in, a couple hours ago that the Supreme Court is throwing out one of these cases. So while we do think that he will be found guilty of at least some of the charges that he's facing, we don't think that will stop him from running for president. Now the question becomes how much of that affects independent vote for Donald Trump. How much will that hurt his chances with the independent electorate? So that's what we're looking at. But no, we don't think that he'll be barred from running in 2024.
Well, it'll be exciting and probably provide our executives with many updates ahead of the November elections. So thank you, Antoine, and thank you everyone for joining us for this edition of the Global View. And I look forward to seeing all of you 1 month from now on our next Global View. Thank you all.
Thank you.